Good morning to all of you. This is Dr. Shri, Associate Professor, Department of English, Shri Mishra PG College. This is a video lecture on a very important topic, literary text in modern context. Literary theory is taught in all the PG courses of English, and it is of very importance for all the students as well as teachers. I think that this video lecture will surely add some new insights to the study of literary theory. I think. But before I begin, I have to talk about two very important things. First thing is that you must know the difference of text and the work. When a writer produces a particular book, it is a work. But when we make a meaning of that work, that is known as a text. So literary text is different from literary work because what the author produces may be a single work, but readers create so many texts. As we make meanings, we create texts. In this period, we will see how reading of text has changed over the years. We are taking an overview of almost 100 years. Literary text was viewed in a particular aspect, and then after 10 or 20 years, there have been different literary movements. Different theorists have talked about text and the reading of the text. And when we are reading the text in 21st century, we must know that how far we have been from 19th century, from early 19th century. There is another thing which you must be very much clear about. That is the difference of literary criticism and theory. Generally, students mix them up. Literary criticism is the explication of the text. When you have a particular kind of text, a particular kind of literary piece, and you make an analysis of it, that is literary criticism. Explication of the text is literary criticism. But when we apply other theories, those perspectives which are beyond the realm of literature, these ideas or concepts may come from sociology, history, philosophy, or any other discipline. When we apply these ideas or concepts on a particular literary text, that is known as the application of theory. So you must be very much clear about the difference of work and text and the difference of literary criticism and theory. Now I am moving onward. If you see this entire history of literary criticism, you will find that different critics, especially Western critics, have discussed literature in a very different ways. And the center of focus has been the literary text. It has been universally acknowledged that the most important activity for a reader is to make analysis of the text, interpret it, and evaluate it. Literary criticism is nothing but judgment of literature. We pass judgment on a particular piece of writing. It may be a poem, a drama, a novel, a prose piece. And when you look at recent criticism as a whole, you will find that there has been a shift from an emphasis on the author to an emphasis on the text, and then from the emphasis on the text to the emphasis on the reader. There has been a continuous shift, right from author to text and from text to the reader. But any kind of approach is bound to have its own relevance, and it has its limitations also. All critical theories are perspectives. They are a way to look at the text. So we cannot say that a particular theory is self-sufficient. We will have to understand various emphases in different critical theories, and we will have to see in the history of literary criticism how theories have come one after another, and they have challenged established ideas about literature, and they have rejected the assumptions inherent in traditional criticism. But the main thing, the question of reading the text, has borne the greatest significance in the study of literature. We see that a great number of critics attempted to theorize what a text is about and how the reading of the text should be made. And their theories offered so much about the reading of the text that there remains a skepticism regarding the very existence of the text itself. Very interestingly, we hear about author's text, reader's text, or as many texts as are the readers, or critical approaches. You might have heard a very famous saying of Stanley Fish: there are as many texts as are the readers. So before even there have been some critics who have announced the termination of the text or the death of criticism itself. So when we see this scenario, a common student of literature feels himself very much confused. And you know that at one time we can apply only one approach, and even that particular approach has severe limitations. So there are multiple theories which cannot be applied at the same time, and every theory, you will realize, is the product of its own historical and social circumstances. It is suited best to a particular kind of literature. These theories gave impetus to the thoughts of critically examine all major literary theories with a view to see how each one of them has dealt the question of reading of the text, and to see if there is any valid or practically viable method for the reading of the text. We will see how in India we can study the literary text, because studying the literary text is of prime importance. When we see the the beginning of 20th century, the first kind of criticism which we notice was the Marxist criticism, the Marxist theory of literary criticism. You might have heard about Karl Marx in his Das Kapital, how he talked about dialecticism, how there is a yawning gap between the rich and the poor. He advocated for the struggle. He said that those who are deprived sections of the society, they will have to fight for their own rights, for their own dues. And Marxist theory of literary criticism follows that the ideas of Karl Marx. Keeping our sole interest on the reading of the text in the modern literary criticism, if we examine this history of contemporary literary criticism, we notice that the first phase of 20th century was dominated by Marxist theory of literary criticism. According to a typical Marxist critic, the text has to be seen in relation to Marxist view of history, in which the idea of class struggle is central. The emphasis was that the connections between the literary text and economic structure of the society in which a work of art is written or created must be taken into account. So what a Marxist critic does, he scrutinizes a literary text and examines how a particular text has portrayed economic structure of the society in which it was produced. And it likes to see whether the weaker sections of the society, the poor people of the society, the have-nots of the society, whether their rights have been portrayed in a true picture. If there is any exploitation of the weaker classes, it is exposed by them. They want to see in what way a particular author has portrayed the weaker sections of the society, whether the particular book is in its ideology, if it is favoring the exploited people of the society or not. Famous critics like George Lukács, Louis Althusser, Pierre Macri, they have been more interested to examine if the literary text presents a suitably full picture of the society or not. So they want to see what kind of society has been portrayed, and they want to see if the exploitation of the poor or the weaker section of the society has not been glorified, whether the text raises the point of exploitation of the poor or not. While traditional Marxist theory simply relates to the text to a view of the social reality of the time in which literary text is written, new Marxist critics like Terry Eagleton is interested in the social and political questions that a text raises. So when we read Shakespearean dramas, or we read Shaw's dramas, or we read a drama of modern writers, we see what kind of society has been depicted there, whether that kind of society has any empathy or sympathy for those people who suffer, who are marginalized, who are deprived, who are the downtrodden in the society. So in this way, Marxist theory of literary criticism has its focus on the marginalized people of the society, on those people of the society who have been segregated, who have been exploited, whose rights have been, who have been deprived of their rights. So they have immense sympathy towards the working class people, towards farmers, towards laborers, towards all those sections of the society who have been exploited or whose rights have been snatched by the upper section of the society or by the powerful people of the society. According to the Marxist theory of literary criticism in general, a text becomes more valuable as an expression of society or the expression of the political ideas of Marx than a piece of art. A typical Marxist critic does not pay much attention to the literary excellences of a work. For him, ideas are more important. Those ideas which have been imbibed in the text, whether those ideas go in favor of the exploited people or not. So this critical approach has led a Marxist critic to look searchingly at the contradictions and problems inherent in bourgeois culture, exploring the ideology inherent in literary texts to see where and how ideological values begin to prove inadequate and incomplete. Broadly, this approach attempts to explore both literature and history, making a connection between the text and the world. The Marxist criticism, which was basically concerned to see how the class of the have-nots had been represented in literature, gave rise to a critical methodology in which the representation of the weaker section of the society, the underprivileged class, or the suppressed class in literary works was critically examined. It surely inspired so many other theories like feminism to a great extent. Because in feminism, we see how women, children, how they have been exploited, how they have been segregated from the mainstream of the society, how they have been exploited by the male chauvinistic society. But in practice, the traditional Marxism amounted to the sheer neglect of the fine excellences of the text as a piece of literature. You will agree that a literary piece is not all about ideas. It is not about political ideologies. It has some literary excellences also. And while scrutinizing a particular kind of text, a reader should see not only the ideology, but also the literary excellences also. And on this ground, Marxist criticism has been criticized. For most of the Marxist critics, what becomes more important for them? Representation of the class, representation of a particular society, the problems inherent in a bourgeois culture, they become more important than the literary excellences of the literature. If you see 20s and 30s of 20th century, you will find that almost contemporary to the Marxist theory was the emergence of aesthetic theory. This theory is known by other names also. We also know it as textual criticism, aesthetic criticism theory, or modernism. Great figures like T.S. Eliot, I.A. Richards, and later F.R. Lewis are associated with that. It is very interesting that though they had their roots in culture, had a very deep sense of culture, F.R. Lewis, he favors nationalism. He favors nativism. I. Richards, T.S. Eliot, they also have a great regard for culture and society. But I. Richards and F.R. Lewis, they were teachers. And as teachers, they, in their classrooms, they argued that instead of concentrating on literary history or biography, a reader should analyze the words on the page. T.S. Eliot in his selected essays, I. Richards in his famous Practical Criticism, and F.R. Lewis in his famous books, Great Tradition and Revolutions, paved the way of modern practical criticism. They were the first in this tradition of English critics who laid down a stress on the reading of the text. The purpose of such close attention to the text of the writing was to reveal the complexity and subtlety of what was being said. Text to Eliot, Richards, or Lewis was important neither as a biographical document or as an expression of society or as an expression of personality, but as a piece of art. Whether it was Eliot or Richards or Lewis, all the three laid emphasis on reading of the text. They believed that text is most important and text has meaning, and this meaning can be derived out by the readers. So the reading of the text was made to examine what the text says and how it says it. So both form and content became very important. What the text says was content, and how it says was its form. So it was very interesting to note that all the three great critics, Eliot, Richards, and Lewis, had a strong notion of culture and society. Still, they let focus more on the text than the artist or a social or cultural background. Their stress on the text and the close reading of the text was something that remained central in whole of the modern literary criticism. If you study entire literary theories of 20th century, you will find that this stress on the text has been in the center. And they are the people who inspired new critics in America. You know that by 30s and 40s, it was the heyday of new criticism, not only in England, but more importantly in America. An aesthetic movement emerged, and in America it is known as New School of Critics. And they were new not because they were saying something very new. And new critics are not new today. Most prominent of these critics were J.C. Ransom, Alan Tate, R.P. Blackmer, William Empson, Cleon Brooks, and much influenced by the ideas of Eliot and Richards. New critics looked closely at text. They coined one word which is known as close reading. What was this close reading? That was explication of the text. For a new critic, the chief exponent of these new critics was Cleon Brooks. The text, for him, the text of literature has a special kind of knowledge. It says things that cannot be paraphrased. It has organic unity. And the role of a critic is to analyze the complex verbal structure of the text, the meaning revealing itself through such close analysis. Cleon Brooks, who was the chief practitioner among the new critics, believed that there was no need of judging the text in terms of the biography of the author or the social or historical background of the author. Text is self-sufficient. In his introduction to his famous book Shaping Joy, he observes, I quote, "At the most primary level, there are very words that the writer employs. For language is itself the product of society living through history. Language is an amalgam of representations of reality, both abstract concepts and valuations." So he believes that there is no need to talk about the background of the author, or about the society of the author, or about the historical background of the author. We have to see the text, and text is self-sufficient to give the meaning. He believes that there is a structure, and if an structure is meaning, if we study a particular poem correctly, if we see how different excellences of literature have been used in that particular poem or in a particular work, and if we see how they have organic quality, there may be figures of speech, there may be use of irony, metaphor, paradox, but in the context, they must have organic quality. Their total effect will decide what is right and what is wrong. So, new critics, though apparently they do not talk of moral criticism, but they are hidden moralists. By analyzing the text, they are not only seeing the form but also the content. And they have analyzed in his understanding poetry, understanding drama, understanding fiction. Cleon Brooks has analyzed number of pieces of literature from different periods, and he has proved that poems or dramas or pieces of fiction are great not because they have been written by a particular author or in a particular historical circumstances or because of the biography of the poet or the author. They are great or they are good because they have literary excellences. So new critics emphasis on the close reading of the text and its idea of the text as self-sufficient entity was much condemned by later critics. By 40s and 50s, new critics were very much criticized by Chicago critics. There was famous Chicago critic R.S. Crane, and he wrote one article which became very famous in those days. He wrote one article. The title of the article was The Critical Monism of Cleon Brooks. And he charged Cleon Brooks of bankruptcy of critical monism. He said that Cleon Brooks is simply cutting a literary text from its background. So, new critics were charged of cutting off a literary text from its author and the society. But new critics' emphasis on the text proved to be very influential for the critics to come. Thank you.